We have a really kind of cool topic to walk through. We're going to keep with the theme of looking a little bit back into the past, but we're going to focus specifically on our brains. Kathy and I both do a lot of research in our respective practices. We connect the dots often between us. And so as we were kind of getting our heads together and coming up with this, we learned some things along the way. So if we think back to our prehistoric caveman times and all the evolution that's happened since, we like to think of ourselves as pretty evolved and as though things have changed quite a bit. But it turns out our brains are pretty similar to the way they were back then. It's going to take us even longer to evolve into our sort of techno futures and fully realizing the AI that we just got done talking about. Our brains essentially operate the same way as they did back in those prehistoric times. And there's good reasons for that. Our brains are there to help protect us, keep us alive, make sure that we don't make stupid mistakes. And understanding how our brains work and some of that history is sort of key to unlocking some of the insights that we use every day in the research that we do. So you may be familiar with Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He describes the System 1 and System 2 thinking in his book. We live most of our lives in System 1. And this is sort of going back to those caveman setup. There's a reason for that. It's efficient. It helps keep us alive. It helps protect us. It's largely unconscious. We're not even aware of it. It's very much based on feelings. And it operates based on patterns and associations. To contrast that, we spend very little time living in that System 2 world, which is more rational, logical, requires a lot more effort for us to think through problem solving and really use our logic. It's much slower. It uses a ton of calories. Some of the patterns that we use to exist in System 1 thinking help us navigate roughly 74 gigabytes of information that our brain processes every single day. So there's good reason why we live in System 1. It helps us sort of go into autopilot and do all the things that we do. If we were having to sort of logically think in sort of moments that were highly critical, think about needing to immediately slam on the brakes while driving a car, that sort of instinct keeps us alive, and we wouldn't want to have to stop and actually process what it is that we needed to do in that moment. Unfortunately, this kind of pattern matching can affect our decision-making, our rationale. It lives in this unconscious brain that we're not totally aware of. Those are biases, and we're here to talk a lot about some of the biases that come up in this pattern matching every single day, and some of the power that we can sort of gain by understanding the biases and navigating them in sort of an expert way when it comes to research.
All right, before we move to the next thing, I just have to take a minute and say, everyone did a really good job pattern matching the theme. Because I'm seeing a lot of stripes, there's some nautical jewelry, everybody looks amazing, so good job on that pattern matching. But now we are going to move into something I'm sure you're all very, very good at, which is creating the sublime. We're going to do some art class here. So you'll notice you have some paper in front of you. If you didn't bring your notebook, I want you to grab a pen, and I want you to make a scribble, very sublime scribble on your notebook, and maybe make 3 or 4. Just make a few. Check in on your neighbor, make sure that they are doing a good job with the sublime. Okay, your scribbles on your paper may look a little something like this, which is perfect. That's exactly what they should look like. Now, I'd like you to choose the scribble and add a beak. And then I want you to add a little dot for an eye, 2 cute little bird legs, and a triangle tail. Clicking through. There you go. Your scribbles may look something like this. Is anybody brave enough to show your sublime artwork? Jen, just got a good one. Now, you may have found when I asked you to do these little scribble birds, how easy it was to select a scribble that looked a lot like a bird, because your brain is a magical machine for finding meaning and matching patterns. And so when I told you, pick that scribble and make a bird, you knew exactly what to do, whether or not you felt you were comfortable in the art space or not. This sort of thing is that system 1 pattern matching. This even works if you have children. I used to do this with my 2-year-old on the driveway with some sidewalk chalk. She had so much fun making these little scribble birds because even at 2 years old, the brain knew how to create a bird out of a meaningless scribble. So these biases have a lot of power, and we want to show you how to unlock those. First up, we're going to talk about little white lies. I'd like to discuss with you a little about your nasty lying habit. So that is the next section. Okay. She's the master of little white lies. This is like the only thing. Okay. So before we start off, I want to know, can you all tell me how often you floss? Actually, hold on. Before you answer the question, I want you to envision yourself laid back, mouth open in a very precarious position, and then I'll be the dental hygienist there. I'm going to be peering into your mouth with a sharp stick, and then I'm going to ask you again, how often do you floss? Every day. Okay, well, there's no one who lies more than someone who's lying in the dentist chair. And I know this for sure because researchers asked people, how often do you lie to the dentist? And I think nobody lies more than they do to the dentist than they do to researchers, because only 27% of people admitted that they lied to the dentist. So they asked a follow-up question, and they asked, what would you rather do than flossing? And we hear things like cleaning the toilet or a sink full of dirty dishes, waiting in a long checkout line. Nearly 1 in 10 of US adults would rather sit in gridlock traffic for an hour or do their taxes than floss their teeth, which tells me there is a lot of lying going on.
But here's the deal. Thinking back to our System 1 brains, lying isn't a bug, it's a feature. There's real reasons why people lie. It helps preserve our self-worth, our dignity, our identity, our relationships. And it turns out that people lie all the time. They lie to nearly everyone in their life at some point or another. And it turns out through research, people lie roughly 1/3 of the time, which is kind of crazy to think about. But to Kathy's point, they especially lie to researchers. The data and the chart on the right, when they asked respondents, did you register to vote, vote in the last election, have a library card, donate, the results on the left. If you actually looked at the official count, some of them are half or less. So it's really important for researchers to pay very close attention to what exactly we're asking and how we're asking it. I have a little bit of a story here. I was hosting a focus group. This is probably 5+ years ago. They were individual research interviews. And we recruited a bunch of people to come in and talk about their financial management. And part of the screener was, do you manage finances for your household? And so the day finally came, we got people in the hot seat, and we started to talk to them about managing their finances. And pretty quickly, we realized folks were saying things like, oh, well, my husband does that, or I don't actually do any of this, because we had pulled up a website that we were reviewing and asking them, like, show me how you would move money around between your different retirement accounts or mutual funds. And so this was a really great way for us to learn that we need to get a little deeper beneath the surface when we're screening for candidates. But also, it turned out that we learned a lot because we had people come through who maybe weren't as familiar, and they were able to give us different types of feedback. But people are always going to want to tell you what they think you want to hear. And this is our first bias, social desirability bias. It's this tendency for people to give answers that they think conform to social norms. And it's so much easier to just say, oh, of course I do that, than to say, no, I don't. And again, that might be some sort of self-protection. They don't want to come off as though they don't have control of their financial situation. But one of our first tips is to leverage additional data in these circumstances to really get to the truth of the insight. Try to triangulate between multiple data sources to understand how many people actually do manage their finances, and potentially avoid some of those little white lies.
So the first and the easiest low cost, easy entryway to get underneath this kind of data is using Google Trends. Okay, so this Google Trends, if you're not familiar, it's just taking a large view at trend data and you can compare it against two different keywords and see where it stacks out. So for this presentation, I thought, everybody loves their children equally, right? I mean, you love your children equally no matter their gender, and I'm sure that the data will show this when we look at Google Trends. And obviously, I'm wrong because when you compare is my son gifted to is my daughter gifted, the question about sons shows up 2.5 times more over 10 years of search data. Now, if I asked any of you parents, you would all tell me that you had equal aspirations for your children no matter their gender, but the data shows something different. Another place you can go to check what's really under the surface is a tool called Answer the Public. It's one of my favorite. It's actually really joyful to use their digital interactions. Now, it's taking search data, but it's showing it to you in a different way. It's showing it to you in the question format or with prepositions. So you're going to pretend again with me. We all work for Nature Made, okay? And we sell vitamins. And so we put vitamins here in the Answer the Public search query. That's vitamins in the middle. And what you're seeing around the spiral around the outside is the sort of questions people are searching about vitamins. Now, what you will find in this data is that people do not search by vitamin name. They do not search by vitamin C, vitamin B. They search by vitamin function. They're asking what vitamin for energy, what vitamin for immunity. Now, if I was your brand strategist at Nature Made, then I would tell you based on the data here that we would triangulate and check in a number of places. But my first instinct is that when you market vitamins, you should not be marketing them based on the vitamin name. You should be marketing them based on the vitamin function. So this is just one way you can get through changing how you're positioning your brand. Now, another wonderful tool to use to get behind this sort of social desirability bias is to use market research. At One North, we partnered up with YouGov, it's one of the world's largest market research companies. They have a tool called YouGov Profiles. This is an audience intelligence tool. There's 6 million members of this panel in the US, 26 million worldwide. They ask this panel questions every week. It's updated every week. It's always on. You can pop in to see how your audience feels about where they spend their time, their money, and attention. And at One North, this is where we start in any project to get a good understanding of how your audience feels about all number of topics. Now, I want to show you on the next slide that even in survey data, people are shockingly honest. So one of the questions that is asked of them is a statement of agreement level. And this particular statement I'm showing you is level of 5-point scale, agreement level. I have been known to stalk someone on social media. The audience in question that we were searching for is readily agreement that they stalk people on social media. Now, if I asked that person directly, I'm not sure that they would answer that truthfully. And to be honest, this is not normally the kind of data we'd be looking for, but sometimes you find something funny and it makes you laugh and you pull it out. And if you are a researcher and if you've been at all involved in behavioral science, you will say to yourself, but Kathy, YouGov Profiles is respondent data and is inherently biased because people are answering for themselves, which includes all sorts of bias for a number of reasons. YouGov offers another product that we have access to called YouGov Safe, where people are willingly giving YouGov access, unfettered access to their tracking data, their search history, their social profiles, their Amazon shopping, their Netflix streaming. And for brands, this is an incredible tool. No bias. It has no bent to it. You can create a custom funnel and see from your ad to search results, to conversations on social media, to purchase, to streaming videos, how your work is working down through that buyer funnel. Okay, I told you a lot of tools that you could use to get underneath some of this bias. Why should you care? If you're not a researcher, if you're not a brand or UX strategist, what does this mean to you? What you're seeing up here is Spotify's private session browsing. They went into their found data. They have mountains of data about how you listen. And what they saw was there were certain tracks that people were skipping really quickly. And they also found that some of those tracks and others were ending up on hidden playlists. So what is the insight here? It turns out, if you're a Spotify listener, you probably care a lot about how cool people think you are. Because the Spotify Wrapped Report is a big defining moment in your social life where people measure their cool factor based on what their data says. So private sessions were born. We needed a place to hide our baby shark, hours of baby shark. Or maybe you've got a Taylor Swift habit and it's not very popular in your family, so you want to hide that. Spotify realized this. This is the kind of experience that creates that brand loyalty. We want to stay with brands that understand us. And this is what this kind of data does for you.
So not only do we want to think highly of ourselves and have others think highly of us, we want to really imagine that we are the best version of ourselves. And this is what we're calling the nailed it effect. You might have seen this come across your social feeds. This is the internet famous Potato Jesus. I noticed this did not show up in Ryan's talk earlier. But is there a better example for overconfidence bias? This is found inside a 16th century church in Spain. A sort of beloved 80-year-old parishioner was given the go-ahead to restore this fresco. And this was the result, obviously not a sort of dead ringer. But there was sort of a bit of good news that came out of this story, and that tourists flocked to it. They wanted to see this. They thought it was funny, charming, and all around good fun. This is how I like to think of myself whenever I'm in a design situation. I can do no wrong, of course. And designers are told this basically from day one, that they should just sort of make it work. You're a designer after all, you have good taste. But this can sometimes inflate the ego a little bit, and we start to develop what we're calling overconfident experts. And the problem gets worse. The more expert you become, you start to assume that you have all the answers and that you don't need to go find any of the data that we just referenced. It turns out that things that we're certain about turn out to be wrong about 40% of the time. So we're lying, we have no idea what we're talking about, we just sort of laugh it off. But this is where the danger obviously can come in when designers choose to sort of go with their guts and just assume that they have the solution correct. One example of this was Uber's entry into India. This was several years ago, back in 2014. They entered that new market after entering several with a lot of assumptions that they were going to be able to use sort of the same strategy to run their business, their service, their product that they always had. That it should be a smartphone app that people can hail rides on and pay using digital payments. Well, it turns out all those assumptions were wrong, because in 2014, the feature phone was the most common device in that country, as were cash payments. Neither riders nor drivers really had smartphones, so they had to learn quickly. And this is another way of doing research, is sort of failing fast. But I think this is a little bit of a foot in the mouth situation, because eventually they caught up and things got better. But there are many examples of this where people sort of assume they have the answers and that it will just sort of work the way that it always has.
One of the things that would have quickly aided Uber's situation is if they would have done just a small amount of field research and not depended so heavily on their confidence. So Rubbermaid is famous. If you follow that story at all, they are famous for really meeting people where they're at and doing this kind of research. So Rubbermaid did a very inexpensive thing. They took 15 two-person teams of designers and product developers, and they just spent a few hours in consumer homes. They walked into garages, they opened up the pantries, they saw what the bathroom closet situation was looking like, and then those teams went back into the conference room. They spent 3 days, and when they came out, they had over 300 new products to put into the market that they already knew were going to revolutionize home storage. Now, this cannot be replicated by any other type of research. This is really that empathy and knowing your audience. The competition, they're just playing catch up now. You cannot come up with 300 new product innovations and expect to get ahead of where they're at. This is true differentiation. Now, Rubbermaid, it's a consumer product. What if you are working for a brand that is B2B, and not just B2B, but rather niche? Let's say you're at a big law firm, and your audience is general counsel at the Fortune 500, or maybe your audience is CEOs. You're probably not getting an invitation to follow them around that day. You're also probably not going to get them to fill out a consumer research panel survey. And if you did, you would not get enough of them to get statistically accurate quantitative data to base those big bets on. So if you can't ask your audience, what can you do? Synthetic research, it might just be the answer you're looking for. This is a very new development. It is generative AI market research. It sits on top of the largest LLMs, and it culls data from all these publicly available sources, not just social media posts, not just websites, but also earnings calls, also academic research papers. It's pulling everything publicly available to create a synthetic audience that is a very, very accurate match to the real people you want to speak to. I'm sure all of you who are critical thinking are thinking, hallucinations, how do we actually know if I'm going to spend this money that it's accurate? Evidenza is the company that we've been working with, and to date, they have tested with over 80 head-to-head tests that are double-blind and peer-reviewed. Head-to-head meaning they did the same survey with traditional market research, and then they ran it through the synthetic research model. 95% accuracy. Is traditional better? It is, except if you can't talk to your audience. In this case, this is what you're looking for. So what can you do with synthetic research? It's just like traditional research, only a lot better and a lot faster. You can segment your audience. You can develop these robust profiles. You can even chat with live personas. So maybe you want to test some value propositions. Maybe you want to test some marketing messaging with these potential buyers. You can do it right there. What you're ultimately getting is statistically significant sample sizes you couldn't get anywhere else. Just before this, coming down here to Maine, I had a client that had a very niche set of audience segments. They had 4 segments, very difficult to find. I went the route of testing out with traditional market research. What I heard back from them, we were only going to be able to get 150 respondents across 4 segments. Not 150 each, 150 total. It was going to take 8 to 12 weeks for 150 responses because this audience was so hard to get. I asked the synthetic research company, they could get me 1,000 in 7 days. So you can see where this value really comes in. With that level of accuracy, research doesn't have to be out of reach, doesn't have to be too hard. We can take this research, make custom buyer funnels, we can understand decision criteria, you can understand that buyer committee dynamic, you can use all of that to create a strategy that really wins.
But how do you get your design team, your product team to maybe believe some of that data or information? Sometimes you're looking at reports and you're still living in your own world. One great example was a design team that wanted to learn more about people with heart conditions. So they sent them out into their daily lives wearing pagers. I don't think we have any Gen Z in the room, so hopefully everyone knows what a pager is. When the pager beeped, they were asked to simulate a heart event. So if they were laying down, they had to jolt up out of bed. If they were standing, they had to sort of fall to the floor, no matter what they were doing. If they were holding a baby, if they were operating a power tool or heavy machinery. And what those designers and team learned was that these people sort of live in sort of the constant unknown. Never in their life did they realize how much these people live in fear. They came back to the table with kind of a complete new understanding of what they needed to do to innovate on that product experience. And so they ended up designing a solution that would help people predict and have warning signs that a heart episode was about to happen. So sometimes even survey data may not get you the full picture. So if empathy that we've been talking about really does require vulnerability, going into people's homes, living your life wearing a simulated device, then trying to seek out some of this truth that's going to get us to our insights, does it require perspective? Typically, people will respond that they are incredible drivers when they think about the question in terms of themselves, but when asked how others might think of them, they answer differently. About 70% normally consider themselves better than average, yet there are way too many accidents on the road today.
Probably not for many of you, because you are all clearly above average.
We're all safely here.
Yeah.
But when we think about the perspective of how somebody else might see it or think about it, it's a completely different question, and we answer it differently. So the final bias that we're going to be covering is sort of this confirmation bias. We believe a lot of things about ourselves. We like to protect ourselves, inflate our own egos. But we also love to live in blissful ignorance of the world around us. And this is what we describe as our bubble. I think everyone's familiar with this concept of social media bubbles specifically. We pretend to prefer the information that we already know and accept to be true, that confirms our existing beliefs. And we typically will undervalue anything that contradicts that. So as researchers, we really need to be aware that every time that we talk to someone, we poll them, we ask them questions, they're going to use that bias. They're going to sort of think of themselves as the best version of themselves in the context of people they know, and be less likely to answer maybe truthfully or from a different perspective. And we have a famous example of this happening.
Yeah, so maybe this image is striking a memory chord for you. This is, I think, in recent history, the most landmark example of confirmation bias, the 2016 election. Okay, so this is Hillary Clinton's campaign headquarters on that night, and it took everyone off guard because going into the election, she was the favorite. The polls really supported that she was going to handily win this election, but it turned out quite differently. Why? I mean, almost certainly social desirability bias was a part of this. People were just straight up lying to researchers and poll takers about who they intended to vote for. Certainly that's the case. The other problem was some confirmation bias. There were extremely different worldviews at play here, and it led to this. So there's a few factors that cause this. First up, in our social networks, we had very different worlds going on, and this was for a few reasons. One, there was a proliferation of fake news that really hadn't been seen before. Two, both sides were embracing conspiracy theories and sharing them out. And then the thing that really compounded that and made it more extreme than ever before is our social networks. The algorithms were separating people out and giving us information that only aligned to our own personal beliefs. Additionally, when we went on to traditional news media, networks like Fox and CNN, though they had been around for a long time, were starting to swerve into sensationalism and infotainment. So this served to create these echo chambers, wildly different sets of worldviews. This requires your system 2 brain. So if you decide to get out of your social bubble and out of your confirmation bias, it's actually really hard to do. Your social networks, the people you spend time with, the news you consume, it aligns with your beliefs and your system structure. It takes a lot of effort to say, I need to get a balanced and more nuanced approach and understand that I maybe don't have a good handle on how other people feel. So, how can we do this? Well, Zach did it with you. It didn't really work, by the way, because you guys are very confident in yourselves. But normally, when we ask you a question about yourself and then we reframe it and we say, how would other people feel about you? You get a much more nuanced answer, much more honest, and much more balanced. So when you're taking survey questions and you want to avoid some of that confirmation bias, just a simple trick, frame it with, what would other people do in this situation, or how do other people view you?
Think about being a child on the playground and asking, being asked by a teacher, like, would you like it if somebody did that to you?
Yeah, right. Do unto others, right?
So an example where folks maybe didn't get outside of their own bubble enough happened in the past couple years. Not sure how many folks in here use Sonos, but it's pretty common, very popular at-home speaker system that infamously you can just flick of your app and control your entire house. Well, they redesigned their app and it completely flopped. People were not happy at all with the redesign. It unfortunately left out a ton of really important kind of highly customizable features for folks who had really complex systems and setups that they just at the time assumed, we'll get to that later. It's not that important. Yet it was probably their sort of most loyal and folks who had invested the most in their systems who utilized some of those features and functions. And on top of that, they made the UI pretty complex. It was not easy. And as a Sonos user myself, I can tell you there were a lot of hidden swipes and layers that had to be managed. Unfortunately, it was such a big issue that it led to a drop in their revenue, and the CEO ended up stepping down because it was their primary customer experience and brand touch point. The CEO later revealed that things that they were doing in the lab, or sort of in the design lab, research lab, they weren't simulating what was actually going on in real people's homes. So they were existing too much in their bubble, doing a little bit too much navel gazing about their own solution, and weren't really getting outside to get a fresh perspective or to ask other people what they thought or how they might see the solution differently. This happens with designers quite a bit. And it's why we typically say test early and often, because the longer you have a solution developed and you have more buy-in, the pressure is on to sort of get it delivered, but also you start to believe that it's right. And oftentimes designers who encounter research data later on in the process will sort of be highly critical of whether or not it could possibly be true that their beautiful solution isn't working for someone.
Definitely not any of you here in this room. You would never do that.
So how do we overcome this? As I already mentioned, kind of doing research early and often, but coming into research with a mindset of discovering new information. We're here to learn. We're not just here to test assumptions or make sure that the one button turned out okay. Asking non-biased questions or non-leading questions, which oftentimes involves reframing how we're asking and who we're asking about. As we mentioned before, using triangulation with multiple data sources, and then just involving fresh eyes, getting outside of the lab environment. So one great example recently of a company getting some fresh perspective was Lyft's recent release of new features for elderly folks. So it was a new version of the app. They actually partnered with external organizations to better understand the needs of that specific audience. They had learned that it was a part of their sort of segmentation that wasn't growing as quickly as others. So some of the feedback were, of course, about usability issues of the app itself, but also about some of the physical limitations of the service, stepping up into really tall vehicles or down into really low vehicles. So they really thought critically about this user group and through inclusive design, created a solution that was unique to them. But I think it's a great example of kind of overcoming some of the confirmation bias of, we're Lyft, and of course our app is great, and it works for everyone, and thinking about ways to innovate kind of beyond the status quo. Last little bit of critique here. There's already, of course, been designers giving additional feedback saying that, some of these features are probably good for everyone. Who wouldn't want larger font sizes or cars that were easier to get in and out of? So it sort of replicates what we already know about inclusive design, is that it often makes the experience better for nearly everyone.
So, what is the point of all of this? You are not the user. You're not the buying audience. You may spend 40 hours a week thinking about them, but you are not them. All of the research that we conduct, the goal is to help us understand that audience more clearly. And we're here to help you break those biases that we all carry. It's about empathy. It's about understanding so that you can innovate. This is how we future-proof our businesses no matter what technologies are coming. It's how we can differentiate and get ahead of our competition. But more than that, this kind of research, it can change lives.
My name is Grover.
Sean. My name is Ian.
I'm Taylor.
My name is Owen, and I am 9.5 years old.
So Owen was born with a rare genetic disorder called Escobar syndrome.
He's had 33 surgeries to date.
I love video games, my friends, my family, and again video games.
It's his way of interacting with his friends when he can't physically otherwise do it.
What I like about the adaptive controller is now everyone can play. You can just say, all right, that's that button, that's that button, that's that button. Perfect.
One of the biggest fears early on is, how will Owen be viewed by the other kids? He's not different when he plays.
No matter how your body is or how fast you are, you can play. It's a really good thing to have in this world.